Today's story will take you deep into one of the most mysterious incidents in recent aviation history. This is about Air India Flight AI171, a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which crashed just seconds after takeoff from Ahmedabad Airport. On June 12, 2025, the preliminary investigation report has raised shocking questions and left the aviation world in complete confusion. How could a modern, well-maintained aircraft just fall from the sky right after takeoff? And more importantly, who or what shut down the engines? On that morning, everything at Ahmedabad Airport was perfectly normal. The skies were clear, visibility was great, and there was only a light wind blowing. Some aircraft were taxiing on the runway, others were boarding passengers at the terminals. It seemed like just another regular day. Air India Flight AI171 was also getting ready. This plane had just arrived from Delhi 2 hours earlier and was now fully prepared to fly to London. Nobody knew that within moments, this Dreamliner would become a nightmare, not just for the families of the passengers, but for the entire aviation community. In the cockpit were two experienced pilots. Captain Sumant Sab Harwell, aged 56, had over 15,600 hours of flying experience and more than 8,000 hours on this very same Boeing 787 model. The co-pilot, First Officer Clive Kunder, was 32 years old, with 3,400 hours of flying experience and 1,128 hours on the Dreamliner. Both had passed their breath analyzer tests before the flight and were declared fully fit for duty. The aircraft, with tail number VTNB, had a minor technical issue during its earlier Delhi-Ahmedabad flight, but the maintenance engineers fixed it before this flight. Now it was in perfect condition. It had 230 passengers on board and carried 54,200 kilograms of fuel. The total takeoff weight was 213,400 kilograms, which is completely normal for a Boeing 787. At 1:13 p.m., the pilots requested pushback and startup clearance. At 1:33 p.m. and 45 seconds, ATC gave permission to line up on runway 23. Wind speed was 6 knots, and visibility was 6,000 meters. Again, ideal conditions for takeoff. The co-pilot, Clive Kunder, was flying the aircraft. Captain Sumant was monitoring. At 1:37 p.m. and 37 seconds, they pushed the throttle and the plane began accelerating. According to flight data, by 1:38 p.m. and 33 seconds, the plane had reached V1 speed, which is the point of no return during takeoff. This was followed by VR speed, and just 6 seconds later, the Dreamliner lifted off the ground. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The takeoff, the cockpit communication, and the CCTV footage. But just 3 seconds after liftoff, everything changed. At that point, the plane reached a speed of 180 knots, and then, shockingly, both engines suddenly lost power. Flight data showed that the fuel control switches for both Engine 1 and Engine 2 were moved from run to cutoff, positioned just 1 second apart. That means someone, somehow, turned off the engines right after takeoff. This is where things become mysterious. In the cockpit voice recorder, one of the pilots is heard asking, "Why did you cut off the fuel?" The other replies, "I didn't do it." But the investigation team has not yet confirmed who asked and who answered. And remember, the fuel switches cannot be turned off by accident. They have a locking mechanism that requires 2 hands, one to release the lock, the other to move the switch. It's designed to avoid mistakes. So how did both switches go to cutoff position, one after the other? Just after engine failure, the RAT-RAM air turbine deployed. This is an emergency device that provides backup power when both engines fail. CCTV showed the RAT deploying and the aircraft losing altitude quickly. Flight data also confirmed that engine power values dropped fast. At 1:39 p.m. and 5 seconds, the pilots declared a Mayday emergency. That was the last message received. Moments later, the plane crashed into a chimney of the Army Medical Corps building and then hit the BJ Medical College hostel. The wreckage was spread over a large area. Tragically, all 241 people on board, 12 crew, and 229 passengers died, along with 19 people on the ground. Only one passenger survived. He had been seated next to an emergency exit. The 15-page preliminary report confirms that the flaps were set to 5 degrees, standard for takeoff, and the landing gear lever was still down, showing the plane didn't even have time to retract the wheels. The thrust levers, though badly burned, were found in the forward position, meaning the pilots were still trying to keep the engines going. Here's the biggest detail. By the time of the crash, the fuel switches were back in the run position. This shows that the pilots tried to restart the engines. Flight data confirms this too. Both engines had started producing thrust again, but it was too late. Engine 1 had been off for 10 seconds, and Engine 2 for 14 seconds. Enough time for the plane to lose critical altitude. So the question is, why were the switches turned off in the first place? Was it human error, a technical malfunction, or something more sinister? Investigators checked the fuel tankers that refueled AI171. There was no contamination. They also looked at previous reports. Interestingly, back in 2018, the FAA had issued a special airworthiness bulletin warning about possible defects in the fuel switch locking system, especially in Boeing 737 aircraft. The same part. Number 4 TL8373D was used in this Air India Boeing 787. It was not mandatory to inspect it, so Air India didn't check. Could this fault have caused the switches to disengage during takeoff? Still, how could both switches go off within 1 second of each other? Could the locking system really fail that perfectly? Or was it a deliberate act? This brings us to a darker theory: pilot suicide. It has happened before. In 2015, the Germanwings Flight 9525 was crashed intentionally by the co-pilot when the captain went to the bathroom. In 2013, a Mozambican pilot manually flew the aircraft into the ground. In 1999, an Egyptair flight crashed with religious phrases heard in the cockpit before nosediving. In 1997, a Silkair pilot shut down the black boxes before crashing the plane. All these cases had things in common. The pilot didn't respond to ATC, didn't try to save the plane, and took deliberate actions to crash. But Air India AI171 is different. Here, the pilots tried to turn the switches back on. They sent a Mayday signal. They tried to pull the aircraft back up before the crash. This shows they were trying to save the flight, not end it. So was it suicide? Very unlikely. Instead, we are left with a disturbing mystery. Either the switches failed due to a technical problem no one expected, or something strange happened in the cockpit that we still don't fully understand. The final investigation report may take months, even years. But what we know so far raises serious questions about safety systems, aircraft design, and emergency protocols.